Welcome to the first ever Ben McGreevy Sports Podcast. This is a really exciting day for me personally. I have been dreaming of doing this for months and months and months. And honestly, we had a podcast with Heath and Cole and me a few years ago, and then we just got busy. But we were finally at a point in life where we could start something like this again. And Ben McGreevy Sports was just a really cool opportunity to place it here. And with this podcast, this time it is going to have a video option. And so we are going to have this show on YouTube along with all the other podcast providers that you might have. So if you're driving down the road in your car or you're out mowing the grass and you want to listen to some hockey content, you can do that right there on your podcast app. Or if you want to sit down and enjoy just a cup of coffee while watching us talk some hockey, we would love for you to be a part of that as well. On today's episode, we're going to be covering just what are our expectations for the Nashville Predators this year. But before we get into the Nashville Predators, we're going to touch on the other wildcard teams. So we're going to talk about Dallas, we're going to talk about Washington, we're going to talk about Boston. And we're going to see, hey, those were the other wildcard teams. What should they expect going into this year? And honestly, we have some pretty neat ideas, in my opinion, on them. Heath and I got to sit down and kind of talk through those guys. And then we spent some time talking about the Nashville Predators and what does scoring look like? What does goaltending look like? What does defense look like? What lines do we want to see together? And in the end, where do we think the Nashville Predators are going to finish this season in the chase for the Stanley Cup? So make yourself comfortable, sit back, and let's talk some hockey. Alrighty, we are bringing in Heath Green. Heath, you probably have seen him on a lot of the videos that we have on this channel. Heath, avid hockey fan, has been since he was just a young child. Heath, so glad you could get on here. If you don't mind, just give like 30 seconds, your hockey background and what you enjoy about the sport. Just 30 seconds. Throw it at me.
Yeah, glad to be on another podcast with you. Obviously, I grew up in Nashville, so started playing hockey around the age of 4 or 5 is when I started skating, and right around 6 or 7, if I can remember back that far, was when I started playing. Grew up playing as a forward, and then started a goaltending around 9 or 10, and then was a goalie up until now. Travel teams throughout my entire high school. Double A, mixture of very minor, random AAA stuff in that Double A league, and then some high school hockey, and now adult league.
Incredible. Adult league for days. That's we all have to grow up eventually. And so I respect the adult league tremendously. But hey, we're just gonna jump right in. Obviously, we're preseason. We haven't seen season rosters yet, but we kind of know who's returning, who's signed to several different teams. And we, like you mentioned, both grew up in Nashville. So we focus a lot on Nashville. And we're going to get to Nashville in just a minute. But I wanted us to kind of look at where Nashville was last year and look at the other 3 teams that were with Nashville. So like these wild card fringe teams, right? And I wanted us to just kind of look at those guys and say, hey, with Boston and Washington and Dallas, which of those teams are the worst? Which teams are the best? Which teams are we going to see back in the playoffs? And we're going to start kind of with those other 3 teams. And then we're just going to spend a lot more time on Nashville in general and really build on who Nashville is. But Boston, Washington, and Dallas. Let's start with the Dallas Stars. Let's throw this at you real quick, and then I want to weigh in a lot on Dallas as well. Better or worse than last year? What do you think?
I think a lot of it's going to come down to this coaching change with Peter DeBoer. In my opinion, I really don't. It's hard to say with Dallas. Dallas is one of those teams. I mean, they could go really either direction, but I think they're really going to end up being probably. And it depends a lot on Peter DeBoer, but I think they're going to probably end up being a little bit worse.
Not just a little bit. You heard it here first. The Dallas Stars are going to be bottom dwellers. They're going to be garbage. Let me tell you why. I cannot as I was sitting here preparing for this and like looking at Dallas, I can't find a reason I like him. Okay, whatever. Mason Marchment signed. Mason Marchment was decent because he was fed by the Florida Panthers. That system scored like crazy. So good job, Dallas. You signed a guy who literally was only good because of the players who surrounded him. Joe Pavelski. What is he? That dude's 38 years old. All right. Yeah. Like that guy's okay. To be fair, he's been getting better with age, but I mean, he's going to fall off at some point. And at some point, dude is 38. If you're relying on him, that's a problem. Sagan and Ben, those guys are such has-beens. I mean, and I don't mean that in disrespect to those guys, but like, when was the last time you were like, wow, Tyler Sagan? Like, I think I was maybe a sophomore or junior in college. Like that's a while ago. Like Rupe Hintz is a good player, and Jason Robertson's a good player, and Haskin is a good player, and Jake Ottinger are good. I just don't know if I look up and down the roster and think like, yeah, playoffs again. I don't know. Do you disagree with that, or do you think I'm overreacting? What do you think?
No, I mean, I completely agree. When I was looking at this roster earlier, there's just nothing that stands out. You know what I mean? Yeah, they got Tyler Seguin, Jimmy Benn, and Joe Pavelski. Obviously, they're big names in the league, but yeah, I mean, they lost a notable player, and he hasn't been that great, but he went back to the KHL and Alexander Radulov this offseason.
And he barely played for them down the stretch as well.
Yeah, and I don't like their goaltending at all.
You don't like Jake Ottinger didn't impress you?
I think he does really well, but if they lose him, Scott Wedgwood's not going to hold down the fort for Dallas. And so they're riding one goalie for an entire season. No, I think Ottinger's really, really good, but he has really no help either way. But here's the thing I like to point out with Dallas. Over the last 4 years, they've only scored about 2.5 goals per game. And they're bringing in Pete DeBoer, a guy who can typically get a team to score 3.5 goals a game, which is why I think they're bringing him in. But I mean, they're averaging about 2.5 goals a game, which in this league just isn't going to work anymore.
Dallas's goal differential last year was -8.
Yeah.
-8 as a playoff team. That's bad.
Yeah.
They couldn't score. And I don't necessarily see their scoring getting a whole lot better. I also have a personal vendetta against Dallas. I just there's something about that stupid goal horn and that stupid green and that I actually love. I think it's a beautiful color green. I don't know. Dallas drives me up a wall for some reason. And so I'm going to naturally choose against them. I think you're right. If Ottinger goes down, I just don't even see that. I think they're going to struggle to win a game if Ottinger's not in net. I mean, that's just Jason Robertson's good. But other than that, I don't know if I see a whole lot of hope on this Dallas Stars team.
No, I agree. I think they could. I mean, they're going to have to get lucky if they want to try to even squeak into the playoffs, I think. And they're going to have some pretty big years from some key guys. And I don't think that'll happen.
I agree. All right, let's move on. The Washington Capitals. Washington coming off a decent season, 100 points. They were so far ahead of the Islanders had 84 points. That was the next closest playoff team. The Washington Capitals, though, are they better or worse this year? Why or why not? Heath, if you don't mind, I'm going to start on this one. I look at the Washington Capitals and their roster isn't impressive to me when I look at it. And hear me out when I say this. They're older, but I personally have a hard time writing off Peter Laviolette as a guy who can, and Alex Ovechkin, and Kuznetsov and all that. I don't know. What do you think about Washington? I can't decide what I think about Washington. I can't decide if I think they're going to be better or worse.
It's funny you say that because I have the exact same thing. I wrote this down in my notes here. They aren't really better and they're not really worse. And I'm the same with you. I can't write off a Peter Laviolette team. Now they are going to start the season, I think, without Nicholas Backstrom with his hip surgery. But, for this Washington Capitals team, they have Darcy Kemper in goal now. And obviously with Colorado, you can't say, did he go and win the Stanley Cup for Colorado? No, but he definitely didn't lose it either.
Yeah.
So I think that gives them some stability in net after losing Braden Holtby a few years ago. But I don't want to dwell on them too long, but they honestly remind me a lot of what we're going to bring up later, and we'll talk about this later with the Nashville Predators. But they remind me kind of like the Nashville Predators, a team that obviously has seen success recently, but has kind of just started to, plateau over the last few years. Obviously, they won a cup, but they've kind of seen themselves plateau over the last few years. But
I don't disagree with this at all. You brought up Darcy Kemper. That was a big thing to me. I don't know if Darcy Kemper is the goalie that sets Washington apart, but they've been missing goaltending a lot, and they played Florida, who was such a good team last year, so well in the first round. The way Laviolette's system works, with a guy, Ovechkin, who's hungry to score. And I know I just sat there and was like, oh, Pavelski, he's 38 years old. What can you, but Ovechkin's only 36. I mean, he's still a spring chicken, but to sit there and be like, hey, I don't know that Washington, here's a question to ask. Like, do you see anyone replacing, will Washington make the playoffs next year, in your opinion?
Yeah, I think so.
I think so too. And so I don't know if they're going to be necessarily like in the divisional race of like, hey, are they one of the top teams in the Metro? But what I do know is that I don't think that they're going to miss the playoffs. I think they're probably going to be competing, if only for the Laviolette system. And I think that if Kemper stays healthy, that's where they are. I think if Kemper goes down, which he has struggled with, that's where Washington is going to struggle.
Yeah. I mean, the only thing that I can point out from last year's in the playoffs, at least, was the only thing I don't like is they pulled what almost seems like a typical Laviolette every once in a while. And we saw this with the Predators, I believe it was in 2015. They had plenty of opportunities to win the series against Florida. They were actually up 2-1, I think, going into game 4.
Yeah.
And they ended up giving up leads in games 4, 5, and 6, and a massive lead in the second period in game 5.
Yeah.
And giving up 5 unanswered goals. And that right there, I mean, obviously every once in a while that happens, but obviously they have a little bit different team this year. So I think they'll be fine. I think they'll make playoffs. I just, like you're saying, I don't think they're going to compete for some division. That's for sure.
I totally agree. We'll see where they go. I don't know that they'll advance it around, but I do like Washington to at least make the first round of the playoffs and maybe the second. Talking about teams that I don't think are going to make the playoffs this year, the Boston Bruins. That's a hot take, and I just kind of led with my ammo on Boston there. I don't know that I see Boston making the playoffs this year. I don't know. What do you think about Boston? Maybe I'm totally wrong on Boston. Do you disagree, or do you think that Boston's going to win the Stanley Cup?
I think they're their roster isn't great. They're in a really bad cap situation. They've got a boatload of UFAs coming up after this season. But you look at their roster, right? So they've got a new coach in Jim Montgomery, who I really like. He did really well in Dallas when he was there, and obviously he had some stuff going on, so he ended up leaving. But I don't like their goaltending, and they're starting their season without notable players in Charlie McAvoy, Brad Marchand, and Matt Grzelcyk.
Yeah,
due to injuries, and I just don't foresee them being able to sustain any of that. I really don't see them doing well.
We have seen this in the Eastern Conference the last several years. The playoff race is decided early in the season in the East. And that has something to do with, like, when you start looking at the bottom of the East, it's Buffalo, Detroit, Ottawa, New Jersey, Philly, and Montreal. Montreal had the fluke season where they went to the Stanley Cup final in 2021, which is wild to think about. But like, when you sit there and say, okay, the bottom half of the East is bad, but like, I don't know that we're not going to see Detroit or Ottawa come out and just tear up the Eastern Conference right out the gate. And I could totally, or even the Islanders have been really good in years past and just had a really unlucky draw this year. I don't know. I could see Boston being the team that's out. I don't know, Pittsburgh might also fall out of the playoffs this year, and that could lead to some, and maybe that's just an interesting thing that I see, but that could lead to some stuff as well. And so I don't know what it looks like for Boston, but you bring up good points with so many of their players being hurt at the start of the season.
Yeah, I think they're a fringe. I mean, they could squeak in, I think, win one of those wild cards. I just, like you said, the Eastern gets pretty much wrapped up right around Christmas time. And once, if you're not in playoffs by Thanksgiving, you're kind of out of it. And
yep.
I just don't foresee Boston being able to figure out themselves when they're missing 3 key players, especially 2 of them, with Charlie McAvoy and Brad Marchand. I just don't see it.
Yeah, I agree. All right, let's move into the last wild card team that we haven't talked about, the one that we're going to spend the most time on, the Nashville Predators. Nashville went into last year. We thought for sure they were going to miss playoffs. I don't know that not many chose Nashville as a playoff team last year. We had a fun season. It was probably the most fun season we have had in a while. That's my opinion, just to watch them. The building was great a lot of nights. It was just a fun team to cheer for. But they squeak into a wild card spot. They are the lowest seed in the playoffs last year. Nashville, better or worse going into this season? I'll let you lead off with this.
I actually think they're better. I really do. And a lot of people will say you and I are biased because we're from Nashville, but no, I really think this team is better than last year. I really do.
I agree. I was when we were sitting there all through the summer and all through June, and nothing's getting done, and you're sitting there at the beginning of July and you're like, man, what is Nashville's going to miss the playoffs? I mean, like, we're probably not going to re-sign Forsberg. You're sitting there and you're saying they're about to go into a dumpster fire. I mean, to me, I'm sitting there thinking David Poyle's done in Nashville. I if you don't do anything, and then you sign Ryan McDonough, and then you re-sign Philip Forsberg, and then you go out and you get Nino Niederreiter. I kind of like this team a lot.
Yeah.
What do you think? So they obviously got swept last year by Colorado. Let's talk a little bit about that, because that can emotionally have an impact on the team. What were your thoughts on the sweep? Is it real? Was it a real sweep? I mean, UC Saros was out. Was that a fluke to the end of the season?
I think the sweep, it was one of those things that, everything came together for Colorado, obviously. I mean, they got, if UC Saros was healthy, I think that series would have at least went. I think they would have found a way to win probably 2 games, maybe. I know 1. I want to say 2, but I don't think it was I think it was a fluke, just because you're looking at a team that they played pretty well in the season, but losing your starting goalie, I mean, a Vezina candidate and UC Saros, and now you're basically having to flip a switch and say, we're having to play completely different in front of this in this goaltending, because we got a goalie who is a backup who only played, I don't even remember how many games.
It was
I forgot his big
save David Riddick.
Big save Dave. He could, how many? I think he played 12 games or something.
Yeah, it was. I'm looking that up right now.
But then you bring in Connor Ingram, who's a guy from Milwaukee, and he hasn't played in the NHL in a while, and throw him right into the line of fire against one of the best, if not the best team in the NHL.
Yeah, Riddick started 12 games last year, by the way.
He ends up going to win the Stanley Cup. And 4 guys doing everything he can. Yeah. It was an unfortunate timed event that happened, and it happened.
And let me throw this out there as well. The standings fell so that Dallas ended up getting that better spot. But Nashville in their last 10 after Saros went down, just didn't stand a chance. And it was like with Riddick and Ingram and net, it was just not realistic for them to win enough games to get a good seeding. If you imagine UC Saros stays healthy, the Predators get that first wild card position and play Calgary, I'm not saying that they win the series, but I'm saying it's a different feel entirely to the end of the season last year.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, you look at I don't want to bring it up, but the Arizona game we went to, right?
Cool.
I mean, you can tell that it was I think was that the last game of the season?
It was the last game of the year.
Yep. You could tell that team was it was a different team without Saros. I mean, they had to restructure everything. The team couldn't take chances they normally took because they didn't have. I don't want to say they didn't have the confidence in front of either the goaltender, but they didn't have that kind of emergency backup plan if they ended up giving up a 2-on-0 or a breakaway or something, or an odd man rush. You know, it was one of those things that you just your game plan just went out the window. But yeah, that team going into the playoffs, you knew that they weren't they really didn't have a chance against Colorado.
Well, and they weren't super strong all the way down the depth chart defensively, and they weren't super strong in the bottom six, but you do make some additions. And I'm thinking specifically of Niederreiter and Ryan McDonough, to get those guys onto the team. And I personally look at those as the additions that and we'll get into this in a minute on where we think Nashville's going to fall, like where we can expect them standings wise at the end of the year. But I really think that the addition of those two guys adds a strength that we didn't see last year, and adds a little bit of a depth. Now, I'll throw this out there. We're talking expectations for the Nashville Predators. Let's talk goal scoring. Obviously, you had Duchesne, you had Forsberg, you had Yossi. These guys went off last year and scored at unbelievable rates. Expectation, where should we be on these guys scoring this year? Do we see scoring continue? Is it other guys that we see scoring? What are your thoughts on that? Where are you expecting scoring to be this year?
Yeah, I think you're kind of with this team, with the way the roster is built. You are, I think, heavily relying on Matt Duchesne and Philip Forsberg to have another season. They don't have to produce 40 plus goals, I guess you can say, but they need to at least produce 30 and maybe even close to 35.
Are you expecting that? Like, do you expect that out of them?
Yeah, they've got to. They've got to produce. These are $8.5 million players.
Yep.
And they've got to produce at a level of what an $8 million player can produce at. Same with Ryan Johansson. Obviously, he's a $8 million player. And obviously, he normally has a decent season, and he doesn't score much. But if you think about Matt Duchesne and Philip Forsberg, if they aren't scoring 40 goals last year, this team's not making playoffs, I don't think. Or they'd be right on the fringe like they were last year. But I think another one who's got to have a good season is Yakov Trinan. He got re-signed for $1.7 million, but I think he's got to have another. He doesn't have to score 30 goals or 25, but he needs to be right back where he was, close to that 17 to 20 goal range. And on the blue line, I think they've got everything settled out with Roman Yossi and everybody, so I think they'll be okay on the defensive side. They're just the scoring is what concerns.
I'm a bit nervous about the right side. On the defensive pairings, I feel so good about the left. I mean, when you look down the left, you have Yossi, Ekholm, and McDonough. I don't know where Ekholm and McDonough are going to slot. Those are three left-handed defensemen. On the right side, this is a concern that I don't know how legitimate it is. On the right side, you have Fabro, you have Alex Carrier, and Jeremy Lazon. I mean, I don't know who is going to get the call on each of those pairs to play with who. McDonough, Ekholm would not let people ever score. I mean, that would be, you wouldn't score on that defensive pairing. But I don't know how the defense is going to pair out, but I feel way better about it this year than I did last year. All the way throughout. Let me give you this. Here's an expectation that I would love to see, and I don't know if they're going to put them together, but I would love to. Portland Winterhawks, a line was together. Do you know where I'm going with this? Have you seen this, or do you
probably?
Remember
but
this back in the day? Ryan Johansson played for the Portland Winterhawks. And the guy who was right there next to him on the Portland Winterhawks was Nino Niederreiter. They were fantastic. Johansson had 92 points in 63 games, and Niederreiter on his wing had 70 points in 55 games. This is a expectation that I hope John Hines rolls with. I would love to see Niederreiter and Johansson reunited. Maybe it is, I don't know who that other guy is up there with them. Maybe Philip Tomasino. But to sit there and throw those guys together and just see, hey, how are they going to do together? I would love to see that line reunited. And if they are and can find a chemistry that they had, granted 10 years ago in Portland, but find that chemistry again, I expect those guys. I mean, Niederreiter had a solid year last year. He had 24 goals.
Yeah.
I mean, if you have Joey feeding him down low in front of the net, I mean, that is an incredible recipe for success, especially if you have the Tomasino snipe available on the outside. I mean, I love that. That is my expectation for scoring for our forwards. And then you can put Duchesne, Granlund, and Forsberg together. I mean, that's what I would like to see personally.
Yeah. Yeah, no, I agree. I think that would be a really good setup there. We just, hopefully they can make it work. That's the only thing that concerns me is, can Matt Duchesne and Forsberg repeat what they had last year? If they don't, I'm going to have a tough time figuring it out.
Even if they don't repeat, but do 80% of what they did, it's going to be a good
year.
I think, and that's
they can
good.
do. Yeah, if they can do 80%, which I think they can easily do. I think the Nashville Predators will be just fine.
Yeah. What I don't want to, we're not even going to discuss goaltending. I think Nashville's in a better spot this year, goaltending, with Saros starting. And then whoever ends up winning the backup job, I think that you're in better hands. That's my opinion. I don't know. What, you agree, disagree?
Yeah, no, I agree. Yeah, as long as Saros can, he was. He didn't give you a good backup option, which is why I think they didn't play him that often.
Yep.
But as long as Saros can stay healthy, which he normally does, he just ended up with that fluke injury last year.
Yep.
I think they'll be just fine on the goaltending side of it.
I agree. All right, expectations. Predators fans, how are we feeling going into this year? Standings wise, I was sitting down and I was thinking, we have a few categories that we can say Nashville is going to be in one of these to end this year. First overall pick is something they're gunning for. Like, they want to win that draft lottery. And they have the ability to, because they were that bad. Missed playoffs casually. So, hey, you're not the worst, but you're like 7th, 8th worst, like pretty bad. Fringe playoffs. So you're in there battling for a playoff position, but you might make a wild card spot. You might be a divisional contender in the sense of you're going to be fighting in that top 3 in the division. You might not be first in the division, but maybe second or third, somewhere in there. And then you have cup contender. Heath, you're a Preds fan. What do you think are the expectations for the Nashville Predators? Where did they finish? First overall pick, missed playoffs, fringe playoffs, divisional contender, or cup contender. What would you say about the Preds this year?
I really think the Nashville Predators, it's hard to, I'm not going to label them as a divisional contender. I'm going to put them closer into that fringe category, and fringe meaning I think they'll be closer to like 3rd or so in the Central. I think they're going to pretty easily get into a wild card spot, but I definitely don't think they're going to compete for a divisional. They're definitely. It depends on how they do. Everything can change in playoffs, so we'll see how the season goes. But currently, I don't think they're they're a cup contender.
I agree with your saying on the cup contender. I don't necessarily put them in cup contender. What I would say is I think that you said this, lock wild card. Nashville Predators fans, you're like, unless something goes horribly wrong, you're a playoff team again this year. Expect to budget wisely. You've got playoff tickets coming your way. You're getting at least a round of the playoffs. Here is the one thing that I do think. I'm interested to see if Minnesota is going to be able to do what they have done the last couple of years, or if Minnesota is going to sink to more of that wild card spot team, and it's going to shift like Nashville and Minnesota. Maybe St. Louis bumps up a spot, but Nashville and Minnesota kind of switch places in that Minnesota's on that wild card team and Nashville's more in the Central Division race. I could see that happening, but Minnesota could also be really good. Kirill Kaprizov is incredible. Kirill the Thrill, right? And so I don't know. What are your thoughts? Do you think Minnesota's in? Do you think St. Louis is in? I think Colorado's going to be the winner of the division, if not the President's Trophy winner again. But do you think Nashville's competing with St. Louis and Minnesota? Are they better than St. Louis or Minnesota this year?
I think they have what they need to be better than Minnesota. A lot of it, I think, for Minnesota is going to depend on their goaltending, what they get from Fleury. Obviously, Fleury hasn't, I don't think, been the same Fleury we used to see when he was at Pittsburgh.
Yeah.
And a lot of that comes from just who he's been playing with recently. But I think they are probably a little bit better than Minnesota. But, Minnesota is one of those teams that, you think they could be really bad going into the season and they end up surprising you, or they end up being really, you think they're going to be good, and they end up going the other direction. So I think they're still going to finish somewhere in that third spot, like you're saying. They're probably going to end up swapping with Minnesota. I think Minnesota kind of falls down a little bit, and St. Louis slides up. But yeah, I mean, I'm not going to call them a full-on
Minnesota
divisional.
has $12.7 million in dead cap this year.
Yeah.
I mean, the Parise Suter buyouts are eating them alive.
Yeah. Yeah. And that's not going to be fun for them. But I think Nashville, I'm still not going to call them, I don't think they're going to win the division, but I think they'll be in that 2 or 3 in the division. Yep. I really do. Unless something goes horribly wrong, they should be in that 2nd or 3rd spot in the division.
I totally 100% agree with that. Well, Heath, Nashville Predators, we're looking at this, get into the playoffs, anything can happen. So expectations, playoff team. I think we set that pretty well. Hey, if you have listened to this point, thank you so much for listening. Heath is going to be a mainstay on this podcast. Anytime he has the ability to be here, he's going to be here. If you remember Cole, we had a little thing, the Hattie podcast a few years back. Cole is going to be here a lot as well. But hey, this is the first episode of the Ben McGreevy Sports Podcast. Heath, thank you for coming on and being a part of this, and looking forward to us getting to just enjoy the hockey season together. Yeah,
it'll be fun. It was good. Look forward to the rest of these here.
Absolutely. And if the recording picked up the thing that I just heard, he said, I think he said, I'm looking forward to the rest of the year, which is what you said, I think. But anyways, thank you for being here today. And we'll talk with you next podcast, man. Yeah. Thank you so much for listening to today's podcast. It is truly an honor to me. If you don't mind, subscribing on the podcast platform that you're on, or if you're on YouTube, hitting that subscribe button, that means so much to us. We are on the process of trying to get 1,000 YouTube subscribers. For some YouTubers, that is a really small goal. For us, that would mean the world. And so if you don't mind hitting that subscribe button, if you're listening on podcasts and don't mind leaving a review, that would be huge for us as well, to try to get the podcast out there and get people to listen. And if you're sitting there saying, hey, I really enjoyed listening to some people talk hockey and I felt like I was a part of the conversation today, tell your friends. Say, hey, here's a hockey podcast that you should totally check out. Something that we're going to do each week on this show is we're going to feature an up-and-coming band that I love and I think that you should check out. This week to take us out, we have Troubadour Blue. They are so soulful, they have such an incredible vibe, and they're just in the beginning stages of what I believe is going to be an incredible career. So here's Troubadour Blue with Loved Me, live.
Whoa, I don't know what day it's gonna happen. Tell me how that goes. When you learn to break a habit, it hurts to know you're headed fast. Where I'm 2 years that didn't last. Where am I gonna be? Is it gonna be a Tuesday morning? Touchdown like a storm, no warning. Blinds drawn, the sun's just pouring in. In the middle of a cup of coffee from the mug your mother bought me. Remember when you said you'd always want me? Whoa, I don't know what day it's gonna happen. Tell me how that goes. When you learn to break a habit, it hurts to know you're headed fast. Where I'm 2 years that didn't last. Where am I gonna be when you love him more than you loved me? Is it gonna be quick and painless? Will you see me when you say it? Doesn't matter which way you play it. I'll be the last to know you crossed the mark. You traded up for a hotter spark. Was I enough to break your heart? Whoa, I don't know what day it's gonna happen. Tell me how that goes. When you learn to break a habit, it hurts to know you're headed fast. Where I'm 2 years that didn't last. Where am I gonna be when you love him more than you loved me? More than me. Whoa, did it ever even matter? Did I set you up for what comes after? Whoa, I don't know. Tell me how that goes. Whoa, I don't know what day it's gonna happen. Tell me how that goes. When you learn to break a habit, it hurts to know you're headed fast. Where I'm 2 years that didn't last. Where am I gonna be when you love him more than you loved me? More than me.